So tonight's Active Travel Cafe is the 8th of October 2024, and tonight we have Mark Philpotts, our very own Ranty Highwayman, who will be talking on the subject of signs. And that's a great topic because even when you get your infrastructure, you need to know your way around it. And we'll be looking forward to that shortly. But as ever, we'll be starting with our crowdsourced news. We'll go around the country, and who would like to come up with some national or local news first? Adam from Bath.
Well, I'd say more northeast Somerset, but anyway, these days.
Okay, northeast Somerset. Yes, fair enough.
One thing people may have been aware of is Active Travel England have launched a new website. And then the other thing that's happened nationally that I was kind of announced yesterday, if anybody isn't on Twitter and has run away from it, is I believe Louise Hayes hosted the initiation of a national road safety strategy. So this is phase 1. So I'm assuming that will go on for many years, but at least that's off there. But yeah, I think everybody is pretty much holding their breath now for what's happening at the end of this month in terms of budget. But that's it.
Yeah, that's great. And I've had a look around the Active Travel England website. There's a nice presentation of some case studies from across the country. There's a new bit about active places, which is a good introduction for, I guess, for people relatively new to the topic, that signposts them the way through the guidance. And I did spot, if you go to the kind of built environment place, there's a nice office building with some cycles in some wheel bender stands that somehow has slipped through the net. So the next time one of you sees Chris Boardman, point it out to him. Ruth from Chiswick, what have you got for us?
Well, I just thought I'd speak because it's been such a long time. But I'm fresh from a consultation of Ealing is finally getting their act together to continue a cycle route that Hounslow put in some years ago. Boston Manor, it's a separated cycle route, which is really, really, really good. But as many cycle routes are, it fails at both ends. So once you get into Ealing, there was nothing, and they're now putting it. So the first woman who arrives and says, "But you're going to take a lot of car parking away. There's no balance." And then someone else said, "Yes, but I see it all the time and no one ever cycles on it." And I said, "Well, I've just ride my bike on it." So that was it, really. Same old bingo cards going on. But Ealing will pursue it, and they will put it in. And I think we know that Cycleway 9 has one of the highest uptakes of cycling of a new cycle route that's ever been. Thank you.
Excellent. And it's nice to see a little balance of heading from 100% car dominated to a little space for cycling on the side is what I anticipate. Thanks for that, Ruth. Ben from Bedford. From Wheels from Wellbeing as well, by the looks of it. I know I'm friends with Kevin Hickman.
Yeah, here in Bedford, the council has found community infrastructure levy money, £120,000 worth of which is to go for active travel spread across the 10 unparished wards. So that is literally £12,000 award. And so there's been the challenge for us to find worthwhile things to do with the sum as small as £12,000. Fortunately, we're not failing entirely at that objective.
Good. 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. We've done 200 of them approved 200 of them in Oxfordshire. It's been a really good programme. But that's really good to hear. CIL being put to good uses in Bedfordshire. Thanks for that, Ben. Chris from Kirklees.
Yeah.
How many more alliterative names have we got? This is great.
So I've mentioned before about the lack of an LC whip in West Yorkshire and Kirklees at the moment. We do have a single LC whip that's just for one route. And recently a major junction on that route has been recurbed, had the pedestrian crossings renewed and been resurfaced. But there was none of the cycling infrastructure added to it, even though there is a plan that's been made. We've seen the drawings for it. So we went to question that at scrutiny last week, and they basically said, well, it's from a different budget, so we're not going to do it. So when the money does come around, whenever 2 years' time, it's all going to be ripped up and redone with the new plans for the cycle crossings in it. And just now, there's been a cabinet meeting at Kirklees where they've been discussing, and they've put through a plan to start charging for the use of car parks in the main towns. It's going to be free for the first 2 hours, and then I think it's £1.60 for the 4 hours afterwards. So it's an incredibly minimum charge, but obviously all the councillors that were there to speak spoke against charging because they think it's going to destroy the town centres. They have no idea about what could be done with a workplace levy. They don't think they've even heard of that, so they're complaining about £1.60.
Yeah, a small step in the right direction. Then, yeah. We've I mean, our local situation of we've just gone from 2 hours free to 1 hour free, and it's still fine. So we're looking at the next step, but it's a very different town. Good to hear from you. Thank you, Mark in Brighton, where it's not raining yet.
No, could be Strong from Sussex. There's your.
Yes, Strong from Sussex. Good.
So I've got two things with my two hats on. So I'll start with the worst news. So Brighton and Hove City Council has decided that one of the things it's going to do in order to increase their income, and the fact that more people have been travelling to Brighton by train, so therefore their parking income has dropped. So they're going to try and actively promote and create more parking spaces to create more income, because they said that they're losing money from the parking. So it's completely at odds with all the other stuff that they're doing, some of which is quite good. But yeah, they're applying a very standard economic model to their parking structure. So that's the bad side of things. The other thing is the work I've been doing on bike share. So Guildford is now up and running properly with Beryl. It's only taken 5 years from the first set of meetings, or actually early 2019, so 5.5 years from the early meeting. And Stevenage, which I was also involved in, also launched a couple of weeks ago with a bike share hub in a no cycling section of the high street outside the town offices. I don't know if Tina or anyone from Stevenage is here, but it'll be interesting to get some feedback as to what happens when people cycle on that. And we are just literally being commissioned to finish off Thurrock's LC Whip. So if any of you happen to be in the southeast corner of Essex, there was a consultation process going on. We've just got all their consultation responses back, which were about 90% in favour, which was a bit of a surprise, but good surprise. So we're just going through a lot of extremely detailed, picky things, which those of you who do LC Whips would know about, things that aren't in there or should be in there. And also lots of comments saying this is a waste of time and the council should do nothing, which we've been told we can ignore.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Thanks for that. And Wookie from Cambridge.
Hello. Yeah, I didn't see anyone more important than me. So this wouldn't really be news, except that it's taken 4 years. So we have a modal filter on Mill Road Bridge. There's been a ridiculously long exercise.
That's quite a big one, I think.
Yes, I guess so. I mean, it should be easy to put a modal filter, right? It shouldn't take 4 years, but there's been consultations and more consultations and votes against and votes for and judicial reviews, and it's all gone around again, and it was done this week. So, well, it was agreed this week. We very much hope to actually see the thing in about a month's time, if nothing else goes wrong.
And Mill Road is the kind of very busy, multifunctional high street kind of.
Yeah, it's a high street, a lot like one of the nice ones in London, New Holland, Mini Holland, sort of narrow, high streety, but also a very convenient way of getting to the middle of town. So it has thousands and thousands and thousands of cars, as well as delivery trucks, and not enough space and narrow pavements and all those things, which in theory could be improved with less traffic. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. And are cars allowed through at any time, or
so
any
the
numbers?
new rules is buses, bicycles, taxis, and blue badge holders or carers. I think blue badge allowed to register 2 cars if you've got a good excuse, basically.
Right.
So
Okay,
we'll see
well,
how
that's
that
pretty
goes in
good.
practice. But yeah, progress.
Good, good. Right, any other? So, bit of news from Oxfordshire, I guess. So we've got 3 more towns or town areas pushing forwards with their LC whips. I've got to remember what they are now. Tame is one. I forget the other one. One is the villages around Woodstock. So Woodstock is where Blenheim Palace is. It's quite a small area, and there's about 5 surrounding villages. So there's a village area LC whip for that. And I still can't remember where the other LC whip is, but there's another LC whip starting up as well. So it's lots of LC whips going forward, which is good. And the other thing is I've used the latest road casualty data, which is also now on bike data. For those of you who know bike data by Cycle Streets, and there's a number of new government tools as well available to look at it in different ways, to have a look at our LTN in Cowley, and the casualties in that remain extraordinarily low. Before the LTN went in, there were about 7. There was an average of 7.5 a year. That's before COVID as well. In 2022, the first full year of the LTN, it went down to 4. In 23, it was down to 2. So there is very comfortably a bit more than a halving of casualties inside the LTN, and casualties on the boundary road, sorry, collisions on the boundary road were also slightly down as well. So this is very good news. I've written that up in a short little paper that I'll the initial results have been tweeted out by the Oxford Clarion, which is a brilliant online news feed on Twitter, but I'll pop that on the COSAT website as well, because that is we should keep plugging the LTNs. To which, Adam, you might want to mention your discovery about the well, I don't know if it was your discovery, but you passed on the discovery about the LTN rules.
Oh, that was specifically that the actual LTN guidance that the government issued was it was only draft guidance and has no legal requirements. It was never sort of ratified. It was almost like a political sort of play before the election. So there was a recent discussion on it in the House of Commons, an exchange there, and the DfT official response back was, "This is draft guidance and is not to be followed, or doesn't need to be followed." So although I understand that some people have started legal challenges using that as the basis for the legal challenge, which means they're about to find a very expensive mistake.
Okay. And Jill from Stevenage. Hello.
I was just coming on to say to Mark, yes, it's been a week now, and Stevenage absolutely loves the barrel bikes. It's been really, really good. Over the weekend, somebody posted a video, like a blog on Facebook, and he was completely not the... If Beryl had employed the most expensive PR firm, they couldn't have found a better advocate. He was, for want of I don't know how to say it, it's just a typical resident of Stevenage talking to his friends, saying it's going to be brilliant. When I go to the Arsenal, I'm not going to drive to the station anymore. I'm going to do this. And he did a 12-minute video of it. It's really, really good. So particularly for Mark, I'll put it on the I'll put it in the chat, a link to it.
Oh, great, because I was going to ask you for it.
Yeah, it is definitely worth. I mean, Tina has passed it on to somebody from Beryl, but it's really, really like gold dust. It's amazing. But what you said about town centre, there's another bit of Stevenage that is a big out-of-town retail park. It's got a big M&S, and next are about to move on to it because there isn't one there. And it's just sort of started a chain of thinking about these out-of-town retail parks, because we all know the high street is changing. Our town centre is becoming more residential, hospitality, and services, and the big shops are moving out into a very big retail park. But the trouble is that there's no, although we've got amazing active travel infrastructure in Stevenage, actually within that retail park that is owned by a private owner, and so not under Highways Authority jurisdiction, we're lucky to actually have the infrastructure is around the outside, but there's no active travel access literally into the site or out of it on the edges. There's steps, there's literally no pavements on some of the road entrances and exits, and then across the car park. And it just has started this big sort of things we're starting to think about. And I suspect this could well be the case elsewhere. I mean, our retail park is owned by a company called 9 Yards, and I suspect that could be elsewhere in the country. And how can we make it so you can actually go to these shops, walking or cycling? We've got next planning application going in, but it's only for a change of use. Unless we can really demonstrate it's going to be a dramatic increase in use. They've got a marvellous transport plan in their application, and it talks about everything on the perimeter, but it's just getting in across. So it's almost just, I'm sort of putting it out there that we've started thinking about this, but it's almost a whole topic for a whole another cafe another time. But I did notice that Mark might have something to say on that.
Yes, we're aiming to book Mark in to talk about bike hire, bike share schemes. We're working on the dates.
But it's specifically about out-of-town shopping centres.
Oh, sorry, out-of-town shopping centres.
Out-of-town shopping centres, and specifically active travel infrastructure within them.
Right.
Because you can't use the best infrastructure in the world to get to a shop if once you get to the edge of the it's summed up by a man who I saw on a mobility scooter last week. He said, I used to go to Marks and Spencer's at Roaring Meg, but then my doctor told me I'm not allowed to drive, so I can't go there anymore, because he cannot access Marks and Spencer's on a mobility scooter, whereas he used to be able to drive it. So that sums it up, really.
Okay, quick one, Mark.
Only if there's time. I just wanted to ask. That is Roaring. Is that Roaring Meg? I definitely proposed a hub outside M&S. Cycled round it, going to the football ground. Beryl, I proposed the first pass. Beryl proposed the second pass, and they didn't feel. Maybe it's a chance to talk to Beryl and bike share people. They didn't feel that docking stations at out-of-town retail parks would be sufficiently. Remember, they're making a profit, so would be sufficiently profit-making for them to do, certainly at the outset, maybe later on. So I'll just put that one in. No disrespect to Beryl, but they have, they're looking at the ones that make a quick buck first and the loss leaders later, if you like.
Yeah, and they've got to do it on the expectations of what will make a profit, and maybe if it takes off more than they expect it to, more become viable. Interesting. Okay, right, let's move on to our main topic for the day then. Mark, are you able to fire up your presentation? And I
will do, if somebody could
introduce away. Oh yeah, we haven't set the yep, set the settings.
There we go. I think we're there, Robin, aren't we?
Yep, I can see that.
Fab. Right, let's have a run through this. I can slow down a bit this week, can't I? So let's have a talk about traffic signs. That's not an authorised sign, by the way. If you thought it might be, just a bit of fun. So, if I can just get rid of the bar that you can't see, that's better. Right, so let's have a little delve into some of the history of traffic signs, and we'll end up with some really geeky detail on how they're designed towards the end. And if I can get the IT to work, I'll zoom right in and you'll see some interesting things there. And I'm sure there's lots of people on tonight who've got stories and other snippets of interesting information about this. So this is proper full-on geek night. So I think it's fair to say people don't like getting lost. We used to walk around a lot. maybe as far as you can go in a day before we had to stay over somewhere, or as far as a horse would go. We could ask people in town where to go next. But if we're in the middle of nowhere, it's a bit more difficult to work out where we're going, especially in the days before maps and Google and everything else. So we had waymarkers were a thing, sometimes a pile of stones, a cairn or whatever. Those of us who were in the Scouts might have actually seen the code for different wayfinding methods with sticks and stones and pointing ways and all that kind of thing. But taking the
Mark, you're a
Romans...
bit quiet. I think a few people are saying that.
Is that any better, Robin?
Yes, that is a bit better.
Is that a bit better? I'll move the little thing up a bit there. Yeah,
Right.
so the Romans took everybody else's ideas as usual, made it their own. Lots of stone pillars out there for wayfinding. And as you can see in the photograph there, there's an example of how that was a bit more contemporary. So it's all about not getting lost. If we go back to the beginning of the 20th century, we started to use lots of cars. And again, people didn't want to get lost. And actually, the first traffic signs in terms of motorisation came in from the AA. So the first one on the right-hand side there is an example of what they first put in 1906 on the Great North Road in Hatfield. Don't know how slow or fast you could go to actually read the thing, but there you go. AA made a start trying to sort out some wayfinding for drivers. Hey, here is another example of some early signs that started to be developed around the country. Fairly familiar, really. I mean, this is quite an old design. Quite familiar, though. Arrows, prominent directions. So I've got main roads there and destinations. One of the big problems were that we kept changing the destination route numbers. So the A64 there, for example, lots of developments in the early years of, let's rename things and not bother updating the times. So it became a bit of a mess in the early days. Between the Second World War and the 1960s, we wanted to design something which is a bit more consistent and easy to see. A nod spot could here, experiments done in the 50s on different types of signage. The sign on the right here, kind of familiar, but also kind of a little bit alien, but we can start to see where the roots of this came from. We had the Anderson Committee in 1957. The chairman of P&O, his committee looked at how to sign our very first motorway. So it became quite important because there was a hot pot of stuff going on. We had to have some proper consistency on the motorway network. And as the Romans stole the waymarking pillars, we stole some ideas from USA and Germany, who'd obviously built lots of motorways by the end of the 1950s. On the right-hand side is an example. Again, it's kind of familiar, but a bit weird looking with that view going off up to the right there. The problem was we sorted out the motorways, but everything else was a bit of a mess. So in 1963, we had the War Board Committee, which was water of ICI, some completely weird people chairing these things. But this was about trying to come up with a complete set of unified traffic signs. And when I talk about traffic signs, I also mean the road markings that go with them. Those who move in general design circles have probably heard of graphic designers Jock Kinnear and Jonas Calvert. They developed the motorway font. So if I roll back, that font there is theirs. It's still in use today. And they were essentially commissioned to look at a complete set of traffic signs. The warning triangle, or tilde warning triangle, you can see on the right-hand side. Again, that's pretty famous. The girl there is modelled on Janice Calvert herself, and the boy there is her little brother. And apparently it was taken from a photograph. So we've got a big book of signs starting to be developed. That started in 1964 with what's fairly modern, and it's gone through various iterations through 75 all the way through to 2016, which you can see on the right-hand side there. It is a big book of signs. It's secondary legislation because it's regulations. It's prescribed. You can use them in certain situations, certain combinations. There's rules around lighting and size and everything else. And here is an extract from the 2016 regulations. Here is children warning sign again. Lots of them have actual diagram numbers. Lots of them try and work out which sign to use. You can use some signs with a little plate underneath, white with black text on it. Lots of interesting information in the columns at the top, which I'm not going to tonight. But essentially, this is telling you what the signs are, what you can use them with, and in the other columns here, lots of different references into all the deep and dense text of regulations on how things are put together. And in general terms, we've got three classes of signs: those that warn, those that inform, and those that regulate. Warnings are generally triangular, information signs are generally rectangular, and regulation signs are generally circular, but obviously with things such as parking signs are rectangular, but they will have either part-time, no waiting, or a cross through it, which is no stopping. Again, you can go into the highway code and have a good look for yourself. We've got some other weird ones that there are regulation signs, such as give way signs, they are triangles, but they're obviously upside down compared to the warning ones. Because the regulations are so impenetrable, we have the traffic signs manual. There are lots of different chapters. There isn't a chapter 2, which is quite amusing. They never actually filled this up. Chapter 8 in the yellow there deals with temporary situations, so roadwork. Chapter 6 also includes how to deal with the design of traffic signal junctions and crossings, zebra crossings, signalised crossings, all that sort of thing. So they're there to actually give us a lot more detail behind the regulations on how we actually go ahead and design signs. And here is an example from chapter 3, which is the regulatory signs. I'm not going to read this whole thing out, but essentially I'm talking about diagram 619, and you'll all recognise it when I flip to the next page, which is this one here: no motor vehicles, very popular recently for low traffic neighbourhoods and other things. It was in the 1964 regulations. It's not a new sign. It just maybe it's gone through periods of being popular. You've also got a no motor vehicle sign, which still allows motorcyclists, which is the one in the middle. And the one on the right-hand side is a ban on motorcyclists. So they can be used in specific circumstances, but often it's the one on the left. Personally, if people are behaving themselves, I don't have a massive issue with mopeds and motorcycles maybe going through some modal filters, but it's a very rare sign to see. So let's go an even deeper layer than the traffic signs manual. There's a whole book of working drawings on how these signs are laid out. So this goes back to the original work of Neer and Calvert, who put together this compendium of traffic signs. Now, what we have here is working drawing, again, of the motor vehicles prohibition sign. It tells us several things. So down the left-hand side here, these are sign diameters in millimeters. We have the width of the graphics for the motorbike and the car, 270 millimeters, 247 millimeters. It's centralized across the middle of the sign. Yeah, lots of different things going on there. The regulations actually tell you the size of sign in the different circumstances. So it's all to do with speed limit. It's all to do with how conspicuous things are. There's lighting regulations around these things, but this is all about having things that are consistent. So going even deeper, here's motorcycle sign, how this is laid out. And the original designs are massive, big drawings of squared paper, drawn out by hand. And over the years, we've now digitized these things. Essentially, if you wanted to recreate this yourself on your computer and you've got the right software, here you go. It's 12 things high, 18 things long, and here's your little one things squares. I'll tell you what the things are in a minute. So get even more into the detail. Here is the standard traffic sign alphabet, the transport font. And as you'll see, every single letter here has got a different width. So A is 4.44 things. The really important one is X, and we'll get to that now. So here is X. Some people may have heard something called the X height, and that is a dimension that lots of traffic signs are rooted in terms of how big they are and how they're laid out. If I just go back slightly, you can see everything has this tall rectangle around it, and that applies to the capital letters as well. The tall rectangles are 8 other things high, which is called stroke width, SW. And there's a relationship between the 8 stroke widths, the height of that rectangle, and how X height is put together. So essentially, the X height, this lowercase x, is half the height of 8 stroke widths, 4 stroke widths, and you're completely confused. But it works in practice. And what we have here at the bottom is something from a live piece of work I've been doing. I don't have the sign design software. There's lots of it out there. It's very expensive, and for bits and pieces work, you don't really need it. So if I can zoom in here, screenshot from my CAD, here is my X. It's 8 things high. It's 4 things high for the X, and you can see that the capital letters are obviously larger, but everything is laid out with specific widths. Put this thing together. Let's zoom out slightly again. And it's a matter of scale. So the X height is about the speed at which people need to absorb that information. On the left-hand side here is some wayfinding for walking and cycling. So that'll be of a certain size. This particular sign was designed to be viewed from across the road. So the X height, the height of the letters here, probably a bit larger than you would if you were right close to the sign. On the right-hand side is A13 in East London, and this sign is absolutely vast. It has to be because people need to be able to read it, take the information in at 50 miles an hour. So this is the height being related back to the speed of traffic. We haven't seen any X's yet on the sign. You don't often see X's. Here is a recreation of 3 traffic signs, well, 2 traffic signs and 1 special. So on the left here is the far left is the exit from a pedestrian zone. The middle is the entrance for pedestrian zone, actually a school street, but it's the legislation goes back to pedestrian zone. And here's our old friend, no motor vehicles. And in order to make sure people don't turn and go down this road in the first place, here is an information sign that basically reproduces is what happens on the left-hand side. So from the driver's point of view, you're heading up here, and you can see to the left, okay, no motor vehicles, and there's a subplate in there. So that's got right into very detail. We've got a big book of signs. We've got guidance on how you use that. 7 books of it, and missing number 2. Except that big book of signs have got some things missing. If you, as a highway engineer working for a local authority, want to do something a bit different that's not in the big book of signs, then you have to get what is called a traffic authorization. This is one for Sheffield City Council, an extract. When the regulations were updated in 2016, somebody completely forgot that if we've got a separated pedestrian crossing on the left here and cycle crossing on the right here under signal control, some people call these sparrow crossings, we didn't actually have the ability to put zigzags in, because often these are treated as junctions. So what the DFT have now got is a standard response that applies for it to say, here we go. Here is a revised set of layouts here that let you use zigzags. It does apply to traffic signs as well as the road markings, but hopefully most things incorporated in that book. So there you go. I'm sure there's questions and comments. I will stop sharing. Back to you, Robin.
Thank you very much, Mark. I delve into the detail of how signs are put together. And I'm sure there are lots of directions we can go from that. Oh, there's a pun. Ruth, there's a CS3 one in there. I don't know if that passes your way, but what would you like to ask about signage?
Hi, Mark. Thank you very much. So 2 questions. One is, now that we have more cycle routes than ever, and low traffic neighborhoods and all these other things, when will they do some new signage? Because it's about time. I can't remember, someone did tell us there used to be a bloke on Twitter called Give Me a Sign Bryn. And we need desperately new signage in line with new kind of infrastructure. And there's a very common one now being used where you have a pedestrian large and a bike is small, which implies that the pedestrian has the right of way. And in the Netherlands, they have the same on roads where the bike is large and the car is small, and it says auto te gast, which means that the cyclist has right of way and the driver is a guest. So can you excite us by telling us that this is on stream to get happening here and we will have new signage, please?
Well, on the slide that showed you how often the regulations get updated, I wouldn't be holding your breath. Now, the shared path sign is what you talked about first. You do sit in park where the pedestrian is larger than the bike. That's not a valid UK traffic sign, but because they're using it on private land in the park, essentially, and not the highway, they kind of can do what they like. I wouldn't hold my breath for that to be updated. The cycle street signage, which was the second one you mentioned. Now, interestingly, in the Netherlands, that sign is not a legitimate traffic sign. It's advisory. The whole way the cycle streets work in the Netherlands is based actually on the design details on how the streets put together, the relationship between cycle flows and traffic flows, and how the network is actually dealt with. And the cycle street type design that would use that sign would generally be part of the main bicycle network. In comparison to that, if you go to Germany, there is a sign, which again, it's all very similar, but the German approach is in law. But for some reason, the German designs are far, far worse than the Dutch designs. So I think in terms of traffic signage more generally, although you might need some back up your regulation, if the street can actually explain how things work, that's much more valuable than the traffic sign, in my view.
Very quickly, though, sorry, it's also used all over Belgium, but because we now, we do cycle and on increasingly narrow roads, which are called quiet ways, because of the width of cars on both sides, Dutch drivers, Belgian drivers, French drivers all seem to give way to us as we're going along, and it is a new highway code rule. So we do need something, though, which helps, especially children, parents with kids, that they can go along these now increasingly narrow streets and have some kind of priority. So could you or somebody appeal to Lou Hague and those people that they need to be doing something soon?
Well, I think in that situation, putting a sign up is not going to work, because if signs worked, we'd have no speeding. We'd have no people going through camera-informed filters. We'd have no illegal parking. Design is always going to be much, much better than regulation and a sign. So let's make our designs much better, that explain to everybody who the guest actually is. We shouldn't need signs to explain most things, Ruth, in my view, anyway.
Okay, let's take one more from the floor, and then there's a good one in the chat. Guy, what's your question from Bath?
Hello. Well, I was going to make one observation, which I think it's interesting how we get across messages in images. Speaking as the son of a graphic designer, so the one you showed us with the car, it always makes me chuckle because the car looks like something from the 1950s, and we still use it to mean car. And the one for speed cameras uses a bellow camera, which even I don't think my dad. You'd have to go back to my grandfather for someone who'd used a bellows camera. My two questions. We talked a little bit before about the savings in sign illumination when you use 20 mile an hour as your road speed. I'd be interested to know some worked examples of where that saving is, because it's another thing we can point to for councillors as an ongoing benefit of 20 miles an hour, and money talks. And also zigzags at crossings. Has anyone actually proved there's a point to those and that they do anything useful? Because they make a right mess of the road, and obviously it all has to be maintained. Those are my two questions. Thank you very much.
So the lighting at 20 miles an hour is a really good example, because I might be wrong, there might be an edge case, but pretty much no sign needs to be lit within a 20 mile an hour speed limit. There will be an exception somewhere, but yeah, pretty much nothing needs lighting. But also, I would say pretty much nothing needs signing in a 20 mile an hour limit anyway. So for instance on that would be, if you've got a 20 mile an hour zone, slight emphasis to change of language there, slightly different legislation, and you've got traffic calming throughout it with humps and everything else, you do not need to paint little white triangles on the hump. If you've got give and take layout, you don't need to have the priority signboards up. I would say your starting point should be to strip as much of that out as possible. Anything that's lit, remove the lighting, apart from those edge cases, which I'd have to go and check the regulations on. And you should have a much better clutter-free street. So I'll give you a recent example. I was looking at something recently, school street signage, which in itself creates extra clutter. But I did notice in the area I was looking at, 21 hour speed limit, so many warning signs were lit. You do not need to light those warning signs. I would question whether you need those in the first place. So you've got double saving there. The actual signs themselves are not having to light them. In the case of zigzags, they are there to pretty much guarantee the forward visibility of people waiting to cross and being on the crossing. Again, maybe habits have changed. Maybe people are different at different parts of the country. But on the whole, the zigzag are probably more respected than WL lines. But you have to have something there to tell drivers not to park on those approaches or exits to the crossing. So I'm afraid for the urban designers who like to take them down to 2 markings either side of a crossing, not being naughty, sometimes you have to have stuff in your scheme that have a safety critical function.
Great, good question. I'm just going to pull one from the chat, which is kind of a bit linked to, no, it's not very well linked to that actually, which is on active travel signage. Some of the signs we see most of them have distance, but some have time. The question is whether there's a good preference for one or the other.
Another good question. So time is based on, I guess, an average speed of somebody.
Yep.
If it's me, it's 10 miles an hour if you're lucky. If it's somebody on an e-bike, they're a bit quicker. If it's somebody on a racer, probably quicker still. I think largely the idea of putting the time on signs was a bit of a marketing gimmick. I think London tried to push it to start with, probably TfL. It's kind of okay, but it's different things for different people. So generally speaking, I prefer distance. I kind of see where time could be useful, but if you're telling somebody you're 5 minutes from a destination, that's great. If they're looking at a sign that's an hour away, it's not particularly good marketing, is it? So
yes,
yeah. You can use both, but be consistent, I guess, is the main message. But the further away from something you are, probably need to have distance. Should be in kilometers, obviously, but there you go. It's a whole different question.
Of course. Adam, I haven't put yours in the chat with capital letters at the front, but I'll let you in anyway.
Okay. Can anybody submit a traffic authorization? So could we sponsor, say, the cost of getting something in, or is it only highways?
Well, no, you'd need the local highway authority to be the actual applicant, or to have given you a letter of substitution, if you like. So the example I gave on the zigzags, I put that together for Sheffield City Council, and it had a full application going to DFT. There is a form that you have to fill in, and then DFT came back and said, actually, we're getting lots of these. We're just going to pause for a minute and just give you a stock answer for everyone now. So it's slightly irritating because we had the small animals warning sign, the hedgehog sign, the previous Transport Secretary, we've all long forgotten, who was worse than Grayling. He made a massive play on it, and you think, well, if you can blanket that for a warning sign, why haven't you done this for the zigzags across the country? I guess the big points to make on authorisations are there has to be a really genuine, compelling reason why you should do it. If you've got the idea for a sign, you think this might be quite good, you're not going to get very far with it. I've had signs turned down. I think probably I've had more ideas turned down than approved. The last one I had turned down was, you know, the no through road sign, the blue sign with the T shape. I wanted to push the European way of doing that, which had a little cycle and pedestrian beyond that. And DFT said, no, you can't have that. There are directional signs for walking and cycling. I said, well, that's a lot more plus than just one simple sign. But no, person that makes the rules said, no, that's it. You can't have it. What did you have in mind? You say?
Yeah, what it was to say you have the cycle symbol on the road.
Yeah.
Is to put a 1.5 meter and then a line with a dash, so people understand the passing distance for as if you come across a cyclist. Yeah, because I think that's, or even though it could be a horse, which is 2 meters, but the whole point
Yeah.
is that you'd have something that basically marked on the road what the actual passing distance is. So I think some people just don't get it.
Yeah. I'd be astonished if you got that through the DFT.
Hey, like I said, it's like I was wondering if you can use that as a way of
Yeah.
working with a highways authority that's on board with this to actually add this in.
Yeah. That's not to say that highway authorities go and do stuff freestyle. There's lots of that out there, but yeah, I don't know whether DFT writes them anymore or take a dim view, but yeah, I mean, ultimately, a lot of this stuff is there for consistency anyway. So there's yeah, it's a tricky one, Adam.
Is this more to do with signs, or is it to do also with the symbols on the road? So, because I noticed that there was a new pedestrian crossing where they put lots of like flowery sort of symbols on the ground, and I'm assuming that's definitely not in any guidance. So they've just gone ahead and done that. But
They've gone ahead and done that, but nor are those traffic signs, or they're not regulated either. So yeah,
so
I mean,
basically highways
yeah,
authority do what they want.
to a certain extent, yeah. I mean, the general thing with this is if something looked a bit like a traffic sign, then you could get yourself into hot water if something happened. So if there was a collision, you could get yourself into a bit of hot water. If you do stuff which is very obviously not a traffic sign, then you're more unlikely someone to get that wrong. The classic one is zebra crossings, where you've got things that look a bit like zebra crossings, but aren't actually zebra crossings with beacons and everything else. I know there's a whole debate about not having beacons, but at the moment, if it looks like a zebra crossing and somebody assumes it is, if the pedestrian assumes it is, but the driver doesn't, and the pedestrian comes a cropper, I wouldn't be the highway authority doing that. So yeah, be very, very careful doing stuff that look a bit like a traffic sign.
Let's have Martin Gibson.
Thanks. Hi, Mark. A couple of questions. One very quick, because you've sort of answered it. But aside from that no through road modified sign, are there any particular signs that you would like to see added that we don't have, perhaps other European countries have? My personal fave is the white pedestrian on a blue circle, which we don't have, so we can't sort of positively sign a pedestrian only route. And another one, which is how do you think we should be waymarking cycle routes most effectively? I personally find that waymarker signs are often of limited use, particularly when you're moving. It's too difficult to see and interpret them. And things like the London approach with the cycle route numbers on the ground, I find more usable. Just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
I think, yeah, the sign you mentioned would be a good one to have. I think a lot of our signs telling you what you can't do or who shouldn't be there. It might be nice to have a few more telling you who should be there. But if I was going to pick a sign to have, I would actually like the little triangular road markings, like dark peak marking for giveways. So if you've got a speed hump, you've got that triangle. Let's turn them the other way around to mean give way. You find those all across Europe, North America. People understand what they are. There was an experiment done before the 2016 regulations, which included those markings, and people did understand them. It's just that DFP didn't want to changed the meaning of giveaways or the markings for giveaways. It's a lot more elegant. It's a lot tidier. I mean, way marking for cycle routes, I'd always say to go and have a look at what the ducks do. It seems to work. And a lot of it is about getting the right information before you have to make that decision, rather than having to make the decision as you approach that decision point. So in other words, if you've got a junction 100 yards ahead, tell people where to turn before they get to that junction. Don't make them turn or make their decision at the junction itself. And with the duct system, I know there's the number system, there's the leisure routes and things like that. But the general day-to-day stuff, if you're cycling between towns, just kind of have a rough idea of where you're going and pick up the right destination as you go along. So I think it's give it a lot of thought, but also keep it simple, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. So you need a lot of thought to make it simple. And the Alpenton simple system is very good. I wonder how, I mean, there's a difference between you making the same journey every day, you get used to where the turnings are. You're exploring the place for the first time, it's very different. And depends whether you're doing it by map or increasingly satellite navigation device. Let's have a question from John Parkin.
So thank you, Mark. Excellent talk. Martin and Ruth more or less asked the question that I put in the chat. So I'll give you two options. You can answer the first question or the second question. The first question is, what signs do you think should be removed from TSRGD that have passed their shelf life? Or you don't have to answer that one. You could answer the question, what guidance in the traffic signs manual needs to be updated urgently? In other words, what advice in terms of how people use it?
Both good options. I think the problem is with taking stuff out the book. We always like to have more options to do stuff. So yeah, maybe I'll answer the second one. So for the really geeky people, I've just been wrestling with chapter 7, which is about how you design those rectangular destination signs. And the details in there, if you look and you scroll up and down and compare things, but I think the design of those directional signs could be really simplified and made easier. So it's probably not taking stuff out or anything. It's actually going through it, taking a big step back and say, well, actually, guys, look, there's lots of good stuff in here. Can we make this a bit more understandable and flexible to apply to new and emerging situations? So the school street example I gave with that directional sign kind of had to, I knew what I was doing because I've seen it around lots of times, but I wanted to design that from scratch, and I did, and it all works and it fits and everything else. It was a bit of a battle to try and wrestle that out of chapter 7. That's a really detailed, geeky one, John.
Thank you, I like geeky.
There's a few on here tonight and every night. Good. Yes, talking of that, Mark from Brighton was.
Thanks. Just to say, there's all this discussion about changes in TSRGD, and as Mark and I know, they are really risk averse. I won't name the person concerned who's in charge now, but I'll just give you one story about what happened. So there was talk about the accept cycles plate on the no entry sign and the no through road sign. There was a guy called Brian Lyas who was head of cycling at GLC. This is how long ago it was. And he was head of signs. He said, this sign will not happen. This accept cyclist sign will not happen while I'm at the DFT. And he was there for 10 years and it didn't happen. The day he left, or the day after he left, they put into practice the process for adding that sign. So the head of signs, or sign regulation, I don't know what their title is, has an enormous amount of power. And the point Mark made about risk averse, it's about councils can put anything they like on the highway, but if something happens, then they're liable. So another example is bollards or wands. You can't put wands on a white line, on a cycle lane white line, because that may make the line look like it was a striped line rather than a solid line and would change the impact of the sign. So if you do put them on the line, you're liable if somebody then either drives into it or a cyclist hits the wand or something like that. So it's all done from a principle of litigation. You might get, if there was to be a crash and a casualty, you might be liable. So that's the guiding principle to the whole structure behind it all. And the other issue about changing signs, remember there are thousands, tens, millions maybe of signs out there. If you start changing them, what are you going to do? Are you going to take away the ones that exist? Are you going to do that overnight and replace them all? So from a local authority point of view, there is this huge weight of all the signs that are there at the moment. Metal manufacturers would love it, of course, if they had to go and redo them all. But just remember, the legacy of everything that's there.
Yes, and I think that it tackles the question that's in the chat from Bev on why does it all take so long for guidance or regulations to be reviewed. The broader impact of that. It'd be interesting to get the other Mark's point of view on that. Why it just takes so long for any change to happen.
Yeah, I could at this point say I did get Calvert's name wrong. It should be Margaret rather than Janice, but there you go. I'll change the slides and when I send them through. Yeah, I did notice that in the chat there. I don't know why I was thinking that. There you go. Probably looking at something else at the time. I mean, it's a good point that Mark makes about swapping signs. One of the key things or legacies I hope to have left at a previous employer was anything that got wiped out or was due for replacement. Always ask yourself the question: do you actually need to put it back? That goes back to that comment earlier about 20-mile-an-hour limits. You've gone through, you've done stuff over the years. Every so often, it's nice to go back and say, actually, do we need to replace those signs? So you can probably, through natural wastage, get rid of some of those. In terms of the length of time it takes, it's just the government has lots of things to do, and you take your turn the same as anything else. And I'd say, if you go back to my presentation on the number of times it's changed, it was, what did I say, 1964 was the first modern regulation. Give me 2 seconds and I'll tell you how many times it's changed. So the first modern regulations was 1964, and it's changed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times since 1964. That probably tells us that on the whole, what's been put together is really good, robust, and stood the test of time. So yeah, maybe we're overdue for an update, but I'm not sure anybody's really clamoring for massive updates in there. Some people say that the 2016 regulations came out too quickly as well, and there's politics behind get those out, but I'll leave that for another day. Yes, governments take ages.
Good. Thank you. Oh, and Ruth,
Yeah, sorry. But, well, I was just thinking, because I've been ironing and busy, but no entry except for cycling. HS2 was classic in the Chilterns, where so many roads were shut for building works, but cycling was possible to go through. People could walk through. So we do need to have some kind of recognition that more people are cycling, and therefore signage must change to encompass those people who are now cycling and make their lives easier, and rather than having to go miles round and blah, 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 or ask the builders, can we go through, please? I think we do need them.
I don't think that's a signage issue. We've got all the signs we need for that. It's just how badly implementing closures, diversions, and things like that we are. So yeah, most situations, it's probably absolutely fine to leave a gap for cycling through there. Certainly London, I would say central London, because as the utilities come out to my end, they forget everything. But central London tends to be a bit better with that they'll cone off a separate cycle route through the works or something like that. But yeah, some parts of the country, they've never heard of what a bike is. But you won't see anything done properly. So yeah, maybe the Chilterns is a good example there, Ruth.
Yeah, that is a good point. Probably, I think, on which to close off. I think that's. I think we all agree on that. We have had a sighting of a road closed except for cyclists sign on some roadworks in Oxford, which was really good to see. It did, of course, cause a big Twitter row, which was great. But I mean, hopefully that's a sign that the council is paying more attention in the maintenance department. And but thank you very much, Mark. That was a really interesting. It's always great to go into one of these detailed topics, one of these topics in detail, because there are always things that are important, and so much about how active travel, or indeed anything, works is in the details. You have to get all the details lined up and working, as well as the overall strategy, and it all has to link together. So thank you very much. And next week we will have Zolt Schuller from the National Trust talking to us about how the National Trust is doing more to increase active travel in and around its properties, which is going to be another interesting session. So I hope you have a good week of walking, wheeling and cycling between now and then, and look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you very much.